Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here tonight, as all of us are, to pay tribute to an American icon, an actor, a filmmaker, and truly one of my personal heroes.
Mr. Clint Eastwood. Wow.
There is something almost Clint Eastwoodian about the whole affair. Laconic defiance, a refusal to play the game, and an unshakable commitment to his own code.
I realized, I've still got this script in the drawer. Maybe I ought to take it out and look at it before I get too old to do it.
In the theatre of Hollywood, where awards are doled out like validation checks and reputations hang in the glare of a golden statuette, Eastwood's 20-year boycott of the Oscars reads like a revisionist western in miniature, the lone gunman turning his back on the town saloon, unimpressed by the glitter and unconvinced by the righteousness of its patrons.
The next guest has been described as everything from an old-fashioned man to Huckleberry Finn with hormones. Would you please welcome the #1 international star, Mr. Clint Eastwood.
By the time Eastwood finally stepped back onto the Academy Awards stage in 1993, he was no longer just the squinting gunslinger or the steely cop. He was, in the eyes of the same Academy that had shunned him for decades, a director of depth, nuance, and masterful restraint.
And the Oscar for the Best Picture of 1992 goes to Clint Eastwood.
Unforgiven had earned him the kind of belated recognition that often greets those the Oscars once dismissed as unworthy of their approval.
I think a turning point for me was in the early 90s. I did Unforgiven.
I'll see you in hell, William Money.
But behind the measured smile and the gracious acceptance speeches, there remained the memory of 2 long decades in which Eastwood had kept his promise. Never invite me again. Clint Eastwood's early career was defined not by awards but by audiences.
Hey Jaffe, is that tin Ford still parked across the front of the bank?
His rise to fame through Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns and later the Dirty Harry franchise made him a box office staple, but a critical afterthought. The Academy, in its eternal pursuit of respectability, had little appetite for the genres Eastwood inhabited. Westerns and action thrillers were, for much of the 60s and 70s, viewed as cinematic junk food. Lucrative, yes, but artistically suspect. In those days, Eastwood would later reflect, there was this attitude in Hollywood. If you were doing westerns, you weren't doing serious work. It didn't matter how well you did it. It was just that kind of climate. The truth is starker still. For the first 30 years of his career, Eastwood did not receive a single Academy nomination. Not as actor, not as director, not as producer. His films were largely ignored in the major categories. Even when they did make an impression in technical areas, as with The Outlaw Josie Wales or Bird, Eastwood himself was conspicuously absent from the shortlist. He had, in essence, been written out of the narrative. For a man who would later become one of the most decorated filmmakers of his generation, the slight did not go unnoticed. It hardened him. According to Peter McGilligan's biography, Clint, the life and the legend, Eastwood was once heard to say, "I will never win an Oscar, and do you know why? First of all, because I'm not Jewish. Secondly, because I make too much money for those old farts in the Academy. Thirdly, and most importantly, because I don't give a fuck." It's an incendiary quote to be sure, and its authenticity has been debated, but it encapsulates the sentiment that governed Eastwood's view of the institution. The Oscars, in his mind, were not about merit or integrity. They were about cliques, about conformity, about currying favour with a body of voters who had little time for the rugged individualism Eastwood both represented and revered. The tipping point came in 1973, at what should have been a fairly routine ceremony. Charlton Heston had been scheduled to present the voting rules segment, a traditional fixture at the Academy Awards. But Heston, stuck in traffic, was running late. Academy President Howard Koch, in something approaching a panic, spotted Eastwood in the crowd and asked him to fill in. Eastwood agreed, reluctantly, but the script he was handed gave him pause. It was a comedic monologue filled with references to the 10 Commandments, parodying Heston's famous portrayal of Moses. It was a parody of Moses, Eastwood recalled years later, "Thou shalt not be this and that," all relating to movies. Bad material, even for Moses. He asked Coke if the material could be changed. Coke refused. Eastwood's reply was as blunt as the roles he played. "You gotta be kidding. Never invite me again." Coke, perhaps expecting this kind of obstinacy, quipped, "Will you come back if you're nominated?" Eastwood replied, "Yeah, I'll do that." The response from Coke was dripping with dismissiveness. "Then I don't have to worry." When Eastwood eventually went on stage to deliver the segment, he made little attempt to disguise his disdain. "Come on, flip the card, man," he said, addressing the cue card operator. "This isn't my bag." When Heston finally arrived, midway through the segment, Eastwood gladly ceded the spotlight. Later he would reportedly remark, "They picked the guy who hasn't said but 3 lines in 12 movies to substitute for him." The moment crystallized everything Eastwood already suspected about the Academy. They did not take him seriously. Worse, they seemed willing to exploit his fame when it suited them, even as they snubbed his creative contributions. True to his word, Eastwood stayed away for the next 20 years. He did not attend the Oscars, even when his films received nominations in categories that, theoretically, could have justified his presence. The outlaw Josie Wales earned a nomination for original music score in 1976. Bird, his 1988 biopic of jazz legend Charlie Parker, won the Academy Award for Best Sound. But Eastwood himself remained unsought and uncelebrated. This was not, as some might assume, an act of petulance. It was principle. "I didn't need them to validate what I was doing," Eastwood told Entertainment Weekly in a rare interview on the subject. "The audience showed up. The films made money. That was the validation." There was also a deeper, almost existential disinterest in the awards circuit. Eastwood, ever the minimalist, never craved the ceremonial fanfare that so many in Hollywood chased. He was, in many ways, the antithesis of the self-congratulatory culture that the Oscars embody. The flashbulbs, the red carpets, the acceptance speeches, it all seemed foreign to a man more comfortable in a flannel shirt behind a camera than in a tuxedo with a rehearsed smile. It took a film as stark and poetic as Unforgiven to change the Academy's mind.
What do you mean he's dead? He went south yesterday. He ain't dead.
Released in 1992, the revisionist Western was a deconstruction of the very genre that had built Eastwood's career.
This was uniquely different for that, and it had some far-out things in it, but in a believable way.
It was brooding, violent, introspective, a cinematic reckoning with the myths of heroism and the brutalities lurking beneath the surface. The Academy took notice. Unforgiven received 9 nominations, including Best Picture, Best Director, and crucially, Best Actor for Eastwood. He won the first 2. The third went to Al Pacino for Scent of a Woman, a result many viewed as a belated reward for Pacino's own Oscar-less record up to that point. Eastwood's return to the ceremony was understated, almost stoic. He accepted his awards with gratitude, but without theatrics. He didn't gloat, he didn't posture. If anything, his presence suggested a kind of wary reconciliation, as though the man who had once turned his back on the Academy had decided, finally, to meet it halfway. Still, the sting of those early years had not entirely faded. "I didn't come back because I forgave them," he later said. "I came back because the work was finally acknowledged." In the years that followed, Eastwood would go on to become one of the most respected directors in the business. He won Oscars again for $1 Million Baby in 2005, once more taking home Best Picture and Best Director. Films like Mystic River, Letters from Iwo Jima, and American Sniper earned him further nominations, cementing his status as a cinematic elder statesman. The Academy, it seemed, had finally caught up to the man it had ignored for so long. But even as the statuettes piled up, Eastwood never became a fixture on the awards circuit. He would appear when necessary, speak when moved to do so, and disappear as quickly as he had arrived. "There's a difference between being honored and seeking honor," he once said. "I never wanted to be a part of the club, I just wanted to do the work." That ethos, quiet, resolute, indifferent to approval, is what has always set Eastwood apart. In an industry that rewards visibility and cultivates acclaim like currency, he remained a ghost in the machine. Influential but unaligned, celebrated but rarely seen. In many ways, Eastwood's boycott of the Oscars says more about the Academy than it does about the man himself. For years, the institution failed to recognize a talent that audiences embraced and history would vindicate. When it finally did, it was because Eastwood had forced a reconsideration, not through lobbying or politics, but through sheer undeniable artistry. And yet, the defiant note on which it all began still lingers. "Never invite me again," he had said, affronted by the indignity of a script he didn't write, a moment he didn't ask for, and an establishment that didn't believe in him. The invitation, when it finally came, wasn't exactly extended in good faith. It was dragged out of the Academy by a performance too powerful to ignore. Eastwood accepted it. He walked on stage. He took the gold. But he never really played the game. And perhaps that is the most Eastwoodian thing of all.